Rights advocate and senior advocate of Nigeria, Femi Falana, has called for amendment to the Petroleum Industry Act, PIA, to increase the 3% allocation for host community development to at least 5%. Arguing that the current provisions is inadequate to address decades of neglect and degradation in oil-bearing areas. Speaking at the King Saro-Wiwa 30th anniversary memorial lecture in Port Harcourt, Falana said that despite the introduction of the PIA, the benefit to host communities remain marginal and largely symbolic. The legal icon revealed that by May this year, the Nigerian Upstream Petroleum Regulatory Commission announced that over 97 billion naira and $150 million have been allocated to host communities under the PIA, but transparency around the disbursement remains poor. He also called on the National Assembly to review the PIA, emphasizing that host communities' provision should not only be symbolic, but must reflect justice, repatriation, and also direct community ownership, and urge the federal government to ensure that host community development trust structures are transparent, inclusive, and accountable to the people they are meant to serve. But the big question is why we have in the past not heard more as it concerns the 3%, and will a 2% increase change the narrative as it concerns the development of the host communities, and will transparency of the funds still not remain an issue when they seem to have more? Well, this and more as it concerns host community is what this edition of Dialogue is centered on, and that is a call for the increase in host communities fund, according to Femi Falana. And that's what we're having as a major discourse today on the show. We're still looking at the PIA and also the 3% that's made for no other but the host communities, and the recent call by no other person but Femi Falana for an increase from 3% to 5%. Well, anyway, irrespective of the percentage, we have no other person but someone that was a main critical stakeholder, especially as it concerns the PIA and when it even translated into the act. And not only that, he was also a part of that discussion at the King Saro-Wiwa 30th anniversary. And I'm talking of no other person but Dr. Fineface Dunamini Fineface. You do know he's the Executive Director, Youth and Environmental Advocacy Center, and also the River State Coordinator of the Sustainable Development Goals. He's joining us all the way from Port Harcourt. Good morning, Dr. Fineface Dunamini Fineface.
Good morning to you, Michael, and nice to be part of the program this morning from the.
Well, we're really happy having you as a part of the program this morning, and I would just really want us to go straight into our discourse. Now, we do know under the Petroleum Act Section 257 of that very act provides the 3% of the operation expenditure of oil companies will be set aside for host community. And I know you were a strong advocate for that very push before it now finally came into being. But now we are 3 years down the line with that PIA now being law, and the question still remains: are you satisfied with what has come as on account of that 3% to host communities, or do you feel a bit skeptical about the transparency that concerns the disbursement of that fund, as also being emphasized by no other but Femi Falana?
Thank you very much, Mike. I think for a start, to say that it is still very early for us to talk about lack of transparency around the implementation of the PIA, especially in relation to the 3% royalty to host community development trust, because the PIA came into 2021 and efforts are still on to ensure that the host community development trust are set up in every oil producing community clusters across the Niger Delta, and let me say across Nigeria. So that process is still on. I know that so much have also been paid so far to those who have been able to have their host community trust set up. But I think the issue of transparency is early, but it's also good for us to put in place early morning signs of checking and ensuring that transparency is adhere to in this process. But to a very large extent, I must say that so far so good. Some host community development trusts have received their funds. Some are still waiting for their funds. Some are still being set up. And so far, as an experimental that is coming into being for the first time since the PIA came into existence, I think that a lot of things are still happening experimentally. And so far, I think it's been fair. So we cannot really say that the issue of transparency is setting in to the extent that it is affecting the operation of the host community development trust and 3% that is allocated according to the Petroleum Industry Act, Section 257.
If you say so, but I'm also being forced now to ask. You said it's a bit too early, but too early. We already have 97 billion naira being set aside, and we also have $150 million also being set aside as on account of that 3% from operations and also dealings of these oil companies. Well, it's a huge amount to just keep their line fallow. And I know you said we should not talk of transparency, but would it not be in the best interest of that very trust fund if these monies are being accounted for and what they are being used for is also being made known to the public? Because that's where the question lies. I, for one, we've made some quiet investigation, and as it stands now, we've not seen major projects being executed on account of that 3% derivation going to host communities.
Yeah, I think that money has been received, and we heard about all of that, what they are taking, and to an extent,
some host community development trusts are already, spending their money implementing some projects. Some I know in Rivers State are doing so, some I know in Akwa Ibom are doing so. But then I think that so far, even the way it is set up, it has been very complex process that transparency mechanism is automatically in place. But then the people will have to ask questions and ensure that they use the money properly. I don't think the money is lying fallow in many cases because they are being utilized. But then the host community development trusts are also trying to see how they can invest part of this money, and then the interest rates that accrue to them from this money can be used. So that is what they are trying to do to a very large extent. But I believe that, it's still an experimental process. They are trying to see what they can do, considering that the PIA gave so much power to the settlers, which is the oil companies, to appoint majority of even members of the host community development trust. That is why even the Ogoni Dialogue Committee that we have, talking about oil resumption in the Ogoni area, in the paper submitted to the federal government from the Ogoni Dialogue Committee, a report submitted to Mr. President just weeks ago, they are also calling for this section to be amended in such a way that the oil companies should not have overwhelming powers to development trust in Ogoni soil that will give, advantage to the oil companies to appoint those who are not qualified or appoint those who will not be accountable to the people. So all of this put together, and what Falana have called for is very fundamental. And I think we have to continue to push, ensuring that the host community development trusts are held to account in terms of what they are doing. But then trying to talk about lack of transparency, this and that, is still early at this stage, because those said projects in Rivers State, they are also giving periodic report to their people and ensuring that things go the way things ought to go.
Well, anyway, if you feel that, well, it's a bit too early for us to talk about transparency, but I want also still look at one that you also raised, which is also more of a problem for many communities. I don't know of the Rivers, but we do know in Delta State is also a major issue. And it's the issue of the oil companies having that major right in choosing who they feel they want to discuss with, especially as it concerns those trusts, the trust fund. But that's a problem. Don't you think that it will be detrimental at the end if the oil companies feel to have that power to select? Would it not be right? I do know they are pushed for amendment to that very act for it to give the communities the overriding right for them to be more of choosing who should really speak to the oil companies on their behalf. So don't you see that as a problem waiting to happen?
Yes, of course, it is a problem, and that is why we are calling for an amendment, to that section of the PIA, so that the
people can have more powers to nominate and appoint the people that should represent them, that will be accountable to them. Because the moment the oil companies appoints people like the PIA currently stipulates. It gives more power to the oil companies over the host community that they are supposed to represent. So I think that section needs to be addressed. And I think a lot of Nigerians are already talking about that. I've been in this advocacy on, the PIA for a very long time, even before it was passed. It's part of our advocacy. But then that section remains very, very controversial. And we are calling for it to be amended so that those who are being appointed will be appointed by the people to manage the people's money. Because if the oil company is appointing those people, then they are going to be accountable to them. Remember, we do talk about the fact that he who pays the piper dictates the tune. So it's very worrisome to have the oil companies doing so much on the host community development trust and board by appointment, and then you expect those people to be loyal to the community. It's not going to be so. So I think it's important for that section to be addressed. And I think that should be done within possible time.
Let's come to another crux of the matter that Femi Falana talked about, especially when you were there just last week, and is the issue of the increase of from 3% to 5%. Now, I'm almost being also forced to ask, are we going to see any significant difference as it concerns the 2% increase from 3 to 5?
Well, basically, I was there with Falana, as you can see in the photograph that was also just shown on your TV here. I listened to him, I heard him, talk about this issue, and he advocated for that percentage to be increased from 3%
to at least 5%. And he then called for the 13% derivation that the states are taking, that at least 5% of that amount should be paid to the host community development trust, in addition to what they have received from the settlers. Because the states are receiving that 13% derivation as a result of the presence of oil in those communities in that state. Femi Falana also argued that it is not every part of a state that has oil. So when the money is received by the state should give 5% of that money to the host community development trust that are the original host communities where the oil is coming from. And then the remaining percentage, which is 8%, can then be used to develop the state in general. Because it is an aberration that the host communities are getting just 3%, the state is receiving 13% of the derivation, and then the host communities that are suffering the brunt of the oil pollution and the impact in that same state are not getting a percentage of that 13% directly paid to them. That is important for that to happen so that the state can have a sense of belonging, be able to plan themselves, develop themselves, and have benefit from the oil that is found under their soil. So that the kind of thing that happened in Ogoni, leading to the killing of a generation of Ogoni people, will not happen again. And that is part of what the Ogonis are also demanding of the Ogoni Dialogue Committee that is put out, and the report has been presented to the federal government before they talk about oil resumption in Ogoni. That is important for this section of the PIA to be amended. About 3/4 sections of the PIA, but that very section, they are all under the section 257, that those sections should be amended so that it doesn't apply the way it is generally applying in the Ogoni area because of the ills, that are contained therein.
For you to say that, because I was almost going there, I want us to leave the PIA for now and return to the issue of the cleanup in Ogoni land. Yes, like we said, there was a white paper that was really given to President Bola Ahmed Tinubu early this year, which indicated that all seems to be well, and which made Mr. President feel that there's enough time now for oil exploration to continue in Ogoni land. But I want you to take us up to speed, or as it concerns where we are now at the moment. Have oil exploration started in Ogoni land? Has the cleanup been completed? What are the teething issues that seems to exist that is not making many Nigerians feel that all is not well as it concerns the issue of Ogoni land?
I think Nigerians are correct that all is not well with the Ogoni area as it concerns this oil resumption plan and the cleanup. All is not well yet. The plans are still on, and the Ogoni Dialogue Committee that was set up by Mr. President, they have discussed, they have met with Ogoni people, they have submitted a report to Mr. President. And the report submitted to Mr. President, I must mention that they did not validate the report before submitting it to Mr. President. That is to say that after collating the report for every Ogoni that submitted memoranda they did not come back to the Ogoni people to say that this is what we have collated, this is what we are going to present to Mr. President, like it was done in 1990 when they put together the Ogoni Bill of Rights. But then that report is now before Mr. President, and that report has not been officially made public. The report is kept as secret as we have the NDDC forensic audit report. We do not have it publicly, but then some copies are circulating. We don't know how authentic that copy of the Ogoni Dialogue Committee report submitted to Mr. President is. But then the report that has refused to leak, I must mention, is the NDDC forensic audit report. But then in that report, I think all is not well in Ogoni. Oil resumption has not, happened. Oil production has not started in Ogoni as we speak. So the cleanup is still ongoing. And we expect Mr. President to release a white paper after receiving that report to say, out of all that you submitted, this is what we are able to do, this is what we are unable to do. And then they commence the implementation of this. So the ambition of Mr. President to commence oil production in Ogoni within the shortest possible time, especially during this his first tenure, I don't see it coming to fruition at all. Because not just by submitting the report that Mr. President has, but by studying the reports and then releasing a white paper that gives a direction on what needs to be done. And we also need time to implement those things that have been recommended before we can now talk about outright oil production in Ogoni, because there are some demands that the Ogoni people are making on Mr. President, in addition to those that were made in the Ogoni Bill of Rights. So we look forward to Mr. President and white paper, and then we see where we are going to start from. So until that happens, no Nigerian should think that oil production have started in Ogoni. No, that hasn't happened.
Let's leave the oil production itself and come to even that cordial relationship that exists between the Ogoni people and also government at all levels. We're talking about the state, federal, and maybe even the local government. Yes, we do know that recently Mr. President pardoned 9 Ogoni sons that were killed during the Abacha era, which is more like sending the olive branch to the Ogoni people. Now, let's understand the dynamics right there in Ogoni land. Are they now, is there that feeling of we've forgiven and we've let go of the bitter past? Or do you feel the reason that even oil exploration has not really commenced is the issue that the people still have some feeling of resentment towards what played out during the Abacha era against the Nigerian state?
The people still have a sense of resentment over what happened during the Abacha era of the federal government of Nigeria. They believe the issues have not been addressed. And they are also believing that Mr. President, through the various demands that have been made, that should happen. The killing of the Ogoni 9 is very tragic, very tragic, and that happened in 1995, November 10. And since then, one of the key things that Ogoni people are demanding for is a public apology to the Ogoni people for the killing of the Ogoni 9. And that Mr. President has refused to do so far. And it's still part of the demands that have been made that is currently before the federal government of Nigeria, for Mr. President to, apologize on behalf of the federal government for the killing of the Ogoni 9. And then we look at the issue of the Ogoni 4, which made the total Ogoni 13. The honors have been given, they have been received, but we are still talking about exoneration, whereby the Ogoni 9 will be exonerated of the murder charge for which they were killed, because they never murdered anybody, not even the Ogoni 4 that they were accused of killing before they were killed. That never happened. All what happened is that they tried not to allow oil production to start in Ogoni. And as a result of that, Shell and the federal government of Nigeria saw them as enemies of progress, and they wanted the oil by all means. And then they were thinking that by the time they killed them, they were going to be able to take oil in Ogoni land. And that didn't happen. So it's still one of the things that is dragging, and we made it difficult for Mr. President to achieve his objective of resuming oil production in Ogoni land. And I want to call Mr. President back to sometime in 2005. Remember, there have been several committees set up to reconcile the Ogoni people and for possible oil production in Ogoni, including the Okuta panel, that was set up. A lot of these things have been done, and it never happened. But I see a more committed president this time around to addressing this issue. But he needs to give time to this process and ensure that it happens, by ensuring that the implementation of those recommendations made in the report are done, and then we can talk about oil production.
Let's leave Ogoni and come back to the PIA. And that present call by no other but Femi Falana for the National Assembly to do the needful. And the needful in every sense is to see how they can amend that very PIA Act to increase the 3% to 5%. I want us now to go there. Yeah, we do know there's currently amendment. The Constitution is currently being looked into for more amendment to come. Now, do you see that really happening anytime soon? An increase from 3 to 5%, especially when you've stated that most of that money have even not been used. Almost the 97 billion that have been raised and also $150 million that have been raised have not been used and are still being kept in a perceived bank account to gain interest that will also be used by the community. So my question, do you even see the National Assembly, because we do know there will be a public hearing, and when all of this comes up on the table of the National Assembly, that might in every way not encourage them to have an increase. So let's look at it. Do you foresee the National Assembly increasing the 3% to 5% anytime soon, especially from that growing call, not just from Femi Falana, but from other notable Nigerians?
Yeah, this is our call, and that is our advocacy for the implement to be done. But unfortunately, I don't see it happening anytime soon, because I don't think the PIA is even on the table for them to look at right now. What they are focusing on now is to amend the 1999 Constitution and talk about state creation, across the country. That is what they are focused on, and that is what they are trying to use to, go into the 2027 election campaign. So they may also talk about this issue of, amending the PIA, but I know that is not going to happen anytime soon. They are going to allow the PIA to work, and then they look at it for about 10 years. So we may be talking about the issue of PIA amendment sometime around 2030 or 2031. So I think that the 2027 election is not going to see the PIA amended, but the 2031 election is likely going to see the PIA amended. By then, it must have been experimented for 10 years, and a lot of loopholes and other challenges within the PIA would have been discovered, and all of this listed out. Then the National Assembly will then give attention to the issue of the PIA. And it's unfortunate, because even with the billions and millions of dollars that have now been raised from the 3%, but it still has to be so, because whether it is utilized immediately or not, it remains that the money is there for the people. And when it is there for the people, it means that the people will surely use it, including the interest rates accruable as a result of this money being domiciled locally or internationally.
As it concerns the timeline for that very amendment, which you do not see anytime soon. Well, anyway, that's not like dashing off the hope of the PIA being reviewed, but maybe in the future we might see that. But let's come back to the present and look at another major issue that we feel that also has to be looked into. And we do know one beautiful thing about the PIA is that each host community seems to have what is quite needed by them, unlike that of the NDDC that is government run, and what government feels is the provision of the people for that minute they give. But the PIA seems to be different, with the host community seeking for what they truly need at that very moment. Now, let's come back to there. I know you said you've seen some major projects being executed by the host communities, and I'm really, really interested or curious to ask, are really these projects community-based? Do they really reflect the immediate need of the communities, those you've seen yourself?
The project that has been implemented by the Community Development Trust in part of the reflects and aspirations of the people. I have seen some of them advertise to develop solar mini grid for their community to provide steady electricity for their communities. I have also seen some of them award contracts for solar street lights for their community. I have seen some of them building houses for indigent members of the community, and these houses are built and donated. I've also seen them renovating some cottage hospitals within their community. I have seen them give scholarships to their indigents. So a lot of work are being done, and being the people's representative, I think they discuss, they agree, and then they liaise with the people, and then they implement this project. And the project so far advertised and implemented by the host community development trust that I have known, none of them have been kicked against by their people to say that, this project is not good, you're not supposed to do this. I have not seen that. So to an extent, I think they are still on track, and it's better for them because they are closer to the people than it was under the global memorandum of understanding. That's the GMOU that was in existence before we have the host community development trust. So I think so far they are on track, and I think they need to improve on how they are doing it to ensure that
everybody is carried along and things go in the direction that it should go.
Let's leave the PIA and come to another that I know you have a strong bearing about, and also one that you're also advocating for, and is the issue of modular refineries, which many Nigerians feel is about time that we should also look into it, knowing that now we are now having constant local production of refined product, especially with the Dangote refinery. And funny enough, who wants to also have the largest in the world with the 1.4 billion barrels per day production in the nearest future. Now, so let's come down to that, because that's another major issue. Now, one of the teething problems that many people feel is the issue of oil spillage that might account or come to be when we have more of these modular refineries. Now, let's look at all of the modalities for the modular refineries and also the issue of oil spillage. How well can Nigerians, especially those seeking for those refineries, can do best to not impact negatively on the environment?
I think they can do best. Those who are seeking licensing for modular refinery can do by ensuring that they follow international best practices. And that will have to start with the process of even building the modular refinery, by them ensuring that they carry out, an environmental impact assessment
on their project. The environmental impact assessment should be made public for the people to see. The report public as also required by law. And then the people will have to make inputs into that. When it is eventually approved by the government, copies of the environmental impact assessment should be domiciled with the people, who will now use it as a yardstick for monitoring, to look at it from the perspective of KPI. That is the key, key indices, key way of monitoring that process to see. The key performance indicator, they will now use that as a way of monitoring the process of the implementation of environmental impact assessment on the project. If that is done, I think we can be able to address environmental issues associated with modular refinery, because to a very large extent, refineries are operating in other parts of the world, but we don't have as much pollution as what we have in the Niger Delta. And I think that why we do have the pollution here is because the people are not operating according to international best practices. And if that is the way to go, then I think they will continue to pollute the environment when some of these things are allowed. But then if they can follow the best way to ensure that whenever there is pollution, they clean it up, and then in their activities, they ensure that they carry out the best environmental practices. And whenever there is a spill, they look at the Petroleum Industry Act, and then sections of it is invoked to address the issue. I believe there won't be any matter. Just like the INEC chairman is saying that the era of election winning in the court is over, the election will now be won at the polling unit. Some similar thing, if it works for INEC, can also be applied to the petroleum, oil and gas sector in such a way that if OSP occurs, no need for us to go to court. We sit down and discuss, and then we agree using laws that are already provided, because the law says in the PIA that if there is pollution caused by sabotage, you clean up the area using the people's money under the PIA, because the community is currently criminalized under the PIA, that if OSP happen as a result of sabotage, the entire community is held liable, and a percentage of the 3% is taken to address that issue. If that happens, it is sabotage, you pick a percentage of that until that law is amended to address the issue. Then if it is equipment failure, from the joint investigation visit that will be carried out by the National OSP Detection and Response Agency, NOSRA, it's already known. So we know that it is equipment failure. What do you need to do? You pay the people compensation, you clean up the area without having to be silent and we have to go to court to resolve the issue. So I think if the best practices are carried out, modular refinery will be something that we can carry out, we can implement without having these issues. But the challenges we are facing in the Niger Delta today that has not yet manifested fully is the issue that the multinational oil companies are divesting to the indigenous companies. Whenever there is disputes, the indigenous companies normally run to their home country where they get justice. But when they spend time in the Nigerian court, it's difficult for them to get justice. So with the indigenous companies now taking over from the multinational oil companies in the Niger Delta today, it's going to be a challenging time for them to get justice, because the people involved are the indigenous people, the court, indigenous court, and the community, indigenous community. So what we need to do is, as part of the reform that we are talking about here, the judiciary will also need to sit up in such a way that whether it is indigenous companies or multinational oil companies, as far as there is jurisdiction over that matter, our legal system, our court, our judiciary should be able to give the people justice, so that it will rekindle the hope of the people in the Nigerian judiciary, especially as we tilt towards the path of having just indigenous companies operating in the country.
Well, nicely put and nicely said, but I want us to now come to another major one. I know your advocacy network does issue as it concerns oil spillage in most communities. Now, I'm really interested to know, are we having more oil spillage as it concerns most of these indigenous communities? Are we having less of it than we used to, like let's say a decade ago? What is the situation as it concerns oil spillage, and how quick is the response in dealing with them in recent times?
Yeah, I think in terms of oil spills, there is a reduction, especially on the part of sabotage, But that of the multinational oil companies, I've not seen any reduction in that area because it happens as a result of equipment failure. It's beyond the control of the oil companies. But that of sabotage, there is a reduction because of the private security that have been put in place, the Tantita security network. They are carrying out a pipeline surveillance job, giving job to some of the boys that are breaking the pipelines and then minimizing pipeline vandalism. I am not saying that pipeline vandalism has stopped in the Niger Delta, but I mean it has reduced drastically as a result of the combined effort of the private and government security tackling illegal refineries, pipeline vandalism, and environmental pollution in the Niger Delta. But then I think some of these processes, and we have called on the government to strengthen the part of ensuring that they provide alternative livelihood opportunities for the youth who are involved in this process. Remember, they are being paid about 200,000, 150,000, 500,000, depending on your position within the private security network providing security for the pipeline. This money may not increase anytime soon, but inflation will eat up this money. So at some point, they will outgrow this amount of money and it won't be sufficient for them anymore. That will begin to push them to breaking the pipeline. So government should legalize artisanal refineries that we are calling them to do in the Niger Delta by establishing the Presidential Artisanal Crude Oil Refinery Development Initiative, PACODE, that we recommended at Advocacy Center for the government to do. Remember, sometimes in 2017, the federal government also came and talked about modular refinery for the youths who are involved in illegal refineries. If they are also able to give those licenses, we have set up a modular refinery, a multipurpose cooperative society across states in the Niger Delta. And I think if those special modular refineries are also provided, it will accommodate some of the youth that are currently involved in the Tantita security services job. And some of them will have alternative livelihood opportunity. Remember, as we speak, it is not all those who are involved in illegal refineries in the Niger Delta that are covered by that contract. A lot of them are disgruntled and they are not happy that they are not involved. Because even those who are not involved ended up benefiting from it, while those who are involved are still on the street. So I think we need to do more to address that issue holistically. Then we should have these multinational oil companies to change their pipelines, because these pipelines were laid in the 1940s and 50s. They are now bursting and deflating like balloons because they are now obsolete. The technology is also bad. They need to be changed. So it's important for those things to happen so that we can minimize oil spills in the Niger Delta. The response from NOSRA when there is oil spill is still very, very poor. NOSRA often complain of not having resources to respond to oil spill. As it happened, I've had the opportunity of going to the United States of America, and I have studied because I met with the EPA, that's the Environmental Protection Agency of America in Washington, D.C. And they told us how they respond to oil spills in the U.S. That in the U.S., if there is any oil spill that occur, the moment they carry out the joint investigation visit, that always turn out to be equipment failure because they don't have illegal refiners in the U.S. They quickly go in there, respond to the oil spill, clamp the oil point, clean up the area, address every issue, pay the commission, and then transfer the cost of doing that to the oil company that is operating there, the multinational oil company. And then they refund them. Haven't done that. So that makes response to be smart. So I think that what is still serving as a bottleneck in the speedy response to oil spill in the Niger Delta is because NOSRA does not have the capacity, not really manpower in this perspective, but the resources to carry out its duties. So NOSRA should be strengthened to have the same legal standing like INEC, like the NDDC, and it is so independent to have their funding directly given to them from the federation account. It helps them to run their their agency and then ensure that they are able to respond when there is oil spill. But this current system whereby they are under the Federal Ministry of Environment, it gives delay of going through procedures, administrative bottlenecks before they can take action. So, NOSRA should be given a status the way that we have the NDDC, the way that we have INEC, to have an act of parliament establishing our own NOSRA. That way we can have them be able to take action and respond to oil spills. That's the challenges that we have in the Niger Delta.
We really need to say we're really out of time, but before we do go, and I know how busy you are, you're really engaged, but you need to talk to us as it concerns this. I want your final view as it concerns the PIA. Yes, many Nigerians are still in the loop, and it seems to be opaque as it concerns some of the run-ins. And even funny enough, Femi Falana also gave that clearing call, and also gave his own feelings as it concerns the opacity of most of the things that are being done, especially concerns the host community and 3%, and that's accouable to them. But let's leave all of that doubt. What for you will make the PIA work and work effectively? Yes, we do know it's still in the tooth or the teething age, and more have not been done on account of it. But for you, what do you feel has to come as it concerns that, for that growing confidence, for that growing belief to be instituted in the minds of these people in these very different host communities, and in the minds of Nigerians at the end of the day, knowing that, oh, we allowed 3% to be given to the host communities, but this and this and this is the benefit accruable to that very plan?
I think what they need to do in the first instance is to look at those gray areas, sections of the PIA, especially section 275 that has been said to be, anti-people, and then address those issues. And then also try to ensure that the criminalization of communities for oil spill that occur as a result of sabotage is also taken out. Because even the 3% given to them, there is a lacuna around that, and a loophole whereby if there is a spillage in the community caused by sabotage, they still have to dip their hands into that pause to take a percentage of the 3% to address the oil spill in that area. So if all of these issues that have been pointed out in the PIA are addressed, and we have the PIA, the percentage there in section 275 increased from 3 to at least 5, and then we have 5% from the 13% derivation to states, to oil producing states, also paid to the host community development trust. I think some of these issues will enable us to be able to see that something is working. And then we focus on the host community development trust to hold them accountable to ensuring that there is transparency in the spending of the money accruing to them. So if that happens, it's going to be one of the best things to do. I also think that a percentage of the 13% should be paid to the local government areas where we have these oil producing communities, so that they can also develop themselves. So much money is being concentrated on the federal government at the state level as well, while the local government areas are suffering. So I think if they address some of these gamut of issues, where we have a PIA that works and addresses the concerns of oil producing communities in Nigeria.
Before we finally go, let's remain with the issue of the people of the host communities. Yes, you will really agree that when it comes to the Niger Delta, fishing of fishermen and women are always at the top burner. Now let's look at that also. Do you see a reduction in the numbers of fish, especially as it concerns the people of the community, or do we have an increasing amount, knowing that now the PIA has come to solve some of those teething problems like oil spillage that have really impacted negatively on the fishing abilities of these communities? Or do you see an increasing number of fishes now being getting by these fishermen and women on account of a change of livelihood and the betterment of the environment around them?
Some improvement in fishing, yes, because the environment across the Niger Delta is still polluted, and that is why we are saying that
the cleanup going on in Ogoniland should be extended to other parts of the Niger Delta. So I think the federal government should immediately, call on United Nations Environment Program to audit other communities in the Niger Delta and release reports just as we have in Ogoni, so that we can clean up the entire Niger Delta. Because when we talk about clean up in Ogoniland, there are other surrounding communities that pollution is coming from. So we need to also address that. Today in Bayelsa, we have the Bayelsa State Environmental assessment report that is calling for $12 billion to clean up the environment in Bayelsa State within 12 years. If some of these reports are implemented, it will address that issue. Until there is pollution reduced on the waterways, fishing activities will not improve as expected. I know that natural attenuation, whereby the going and coming of tide, is helping to reduce the level of pollution by taking the crude that is on the waterway from the creeks and then taking to the ocean, mixing it, is helping to reduce it. But it is not enough. We have to carry out a voluntary cleanup across the Niger Delta. But because today, despite efforts in cleanup, efforts in providing alternative jobs, efforts in reducing sabotage, efforts in reducing pollution, fishermen are still casting their nets. And when they cast their nets, what they catch is oil and not fish. It's unfortunate because there is hardly any fisherman that goes to net and comes back with a clean net. You will always see their net stained with oil. That is to say, even the little fish they are able to catch is tainted with oil, and oil is part of it. And when we eat all of this, it becomes cancerous. And that is why you have the life expectancy in the Niger Delta falling below 50 years. It is because of the pollution that we breathe in from soot, pollution that comes from fish that we eat, pollution that comes from the environment and poor water that we drink. Remember the UNEP report on Ogoni talk about the fact that water in the Ogoni area, because we use the same water level across the Niger Delta, is poisoned with benzene, 900 times above World Health Organization recommended standard. We all, agents. So it's important for us to address the issue around pollution in the Niger Delta holistically. And while doing so, avoid the introduction of new pollution into the Niger Delta environment, because you cannot clean the floor when the tap is closed.
Thank you so much, and I'm talking of no other person but Dr. Fineface Udamini Fineface, the Executive Director of Youth and Environmental Advocacy Center and River State Coordinator for Sustainable Goals. And we do know we really appreciate your time with us, how busy you are, but you needed to come and do this with us and join us all the way from Port Harcourt. We truly appreciate your insight into the issue being discussed today, and we'll say a big thank you to you. Thank you so much for your time with us.
Thank you for having me on the program. I appreciate it.
Okay, well, anyway, that's more like a wrap today on Dialogue. And you do know we talked about the PIA and some other teething issue that seems to be around that very PIA, with the recent call by Femi Falana for an increase, especially from 3% to 5% of the account or the amount accruable to host communities. And also we talked greatly about the Ogoni cleanup, knowing that President Bola Ahmed Tinubu has given that directive for resumption of oil production in that very area. And then we're undermining some of the teething problems seems to not to be resolved, but well, it looks as if good at the end. But anyway, like I said, we've ended the discussion, but the discussion still continues. Let's get more of your reaction on our social media platforms. They'll be there on your screen. Please send us your questions as it concerns this, your reaction as it concerns the discussion, and remember to always comment on all our discussions, share and like, and we'll like to always get your reaction as it concerns them.